Dust swirled around the Union Pacific locomotive as she stepped off, gripping a worn leather valise that weighed far more than it should. Inside wasn't clothing or lace, but $2 million in stolen railroad bonds. She came to be a humble rancher's wife, but she brought a deadly secret. The wind, howling across the Wyoming Territory in the spring of 1881, carried nothing but grit and the bitter promise of another dry summer. Nathaniel Reed stood on the platform of the Bitter Creek train depot, his weathered hands gripping the brim of his Stetson. At 32, Nathaniel looked older, his face lined by years of fighting a sun-scorched earth and a mountain of debt. His cattle ranch, the Double R, was bleeding money. Worse, the local land baron, a ruthless ex-cavalry officer named Harrison Wade, held the mortgage and was tightening the noose with every passing week. Nathaniel needed help. He needed a partner, a worker, a wife. He hadn't sought love when he placed the advertisement in the St. Louis Dispatch 3 months prior. He had sought a survivor. The letters he received in return were from a woman named Beatrice Miller, a self-proclaimed destitute seamstress who wrote with a quiet, practical dignity. She asked for no luxuries, only a safe home and a man of his word. Nathaniel had sent her a train ticket and a silver ring that had belonged to his mother. When the steam cleared from the tracks, Nathaniel saw her. Beatrice did not look like a woman who had spent her life pricking her fingers on cheap cotton. She wore a simple charcoal wool dress, but the cut of it spoke of Eastern tailors, and her posture was remarkably rigid, almost aristocratic. Her auburn hair was pinned back beneath a modest hat, and her dark eyes swept the desolate frontier town with an emotion Nathaniel couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear. It looked dangerously like calculation. He approached her, taking off his hat. "Miss Miller?" She turned, her eyes locking onto his. "Mr. Reed, I recognize you from your description. You are exactly as you wrote." "And you are a bit different than I pictured," Nathaniel admitted, his gaze drifting to the luggage beside her on the wooden platform. There were 3 massive, brass-bound steamer trunks. They looked heavy enough to break a wagon axle. You pack heavy for a woman claiming to own nothing but the clothes on her back. A flicker of tension crossed Beatrice's face, quickly masked by a polite smile. "A woman's life is mostly made of memories, Mr. Reed. Books, family heirlooms, things I could not bear to leave behind. I hope you have room for them." Nathaniel didn't press the issue. He loaded the trunks into his buckboard wagon, groaning under the immense, unnatural weight of the largest one. By noon, they were standing before Judge Hiram Fletcher in the dusty back room of the town's general store. The ceremony was brief, devoid of romance, sealed with a signature in the county ledger and the slide of a tarnished silver band onto Beatrice's finger. The ride to the Double R Ranch took 3 hours. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the rhythmic thud of the horses' hooves and the creaking of the heavily burdened wagon. Nathaniel showed her the modest, 2-room cabin. It was clean but sparse, smelling of pine wood and old coffee. "I'll sleep in the loft," Nathaniel told her that first evening, keeping a respectful distance as she unpacked a meager selection of clothing. "You take the main bed. I don't expect anything from you, Beatrice, other than what we agreed upon. We work the land, we keep the house, we survive." "I am not afraid of hard work, Nathaniel," she replied quietly, her eyes lingering on the largest brass-bound trunk pushed into the corner of the room. "But there is one condition I must insist upon, which I did not mention in my letters." He frowned, leaning against the doorframe. "And what's that?" "That trunk," she pointed to the massive chest. "It remains locked, and it remains strictly mine. You are never to ask what is inside, and you are never to try and open it." Nathaniel studied her. On the frontier, a man learned quickly not to pry into another's past. Nearly everyone who came west was running from something. "Your secrets are your own, Beatrice. As long as they don't bring trouble to my door." "They won't," she lied. Over the next 6 weeks, Beatrice proved her worth. The soft skin of her hands blistered and then calloused as she learned to chop wood, tend the vegetable garden, and manage the meager rations of flour and salted beef. She was fiercely intelligent, reorganizing Nathaniel's disastrous ledger books with a mathematical precision that shocked him. Despite the harsh conditions, a quiet, genuine affection began to bloom between them. Nathaniel found himself lingering at the dinner table, captivated by her sharp wit, while Beatrice found an unexpected peace in Nathaniel's steady, honorable nature. He was a hard man, but a profoundly decent one. But the peace was an illusion. Shattered on a scorching Tuesday afternoon in late May, dust plumed on the horizon, signaling the arrival of Harrison Wade and two of his hired gunmen. Nathaniel stepped off the porch, his hand resting casually near the Colt revolver on his hip. Beatrice watched from the open window, a damp cloth clutched tightly in her hands. Wade did not dismount. He looked down at Nathaniel with a predatory sneer. "Time's up, Reed. The bank in Denver sold me the rest of your notes. You owe $4,000 by the 1st of the month. If I don't have it in gold or federal tender, my men will be back to clear you off my land." 4,000. Nathaniel's voice was tight with suppressed rage. "The debt was 2. You bought the paper just to double the interest." "Business is business," Wade said smoothly, tipping his hat to Beatrice in the window. "Shame to make a newlywed homeless. 1st of the month, Nathaniel." When they rode off, Nathaniel walked out to the corral and buried his face in his hands. Beatrice watched him from the doorway, her heart aching for the man who had given her sanctuary. $4,000 was an impossible sum for a rancher. It might as well have been $1 million. That night, a thunderstorm rolled over the Wyoming plains, masking the sounds of the house. Nathaniel had exhausted himself repairing fences and was sleeping deeply in the loft. Beatrice lit a single kerosene lantern, turning the wick down low. She knelt beside the massive, brass-bound trunk. Reaching beneath the collar of her nightgown, she pulled out an iron skeleton key she kept on a leather cord around her neck. She unlocked the heavy clasps. Inside lay layers of old woolen blankets. Beatrice carefully removed them, revealing a false wooden bottom. She slid a thin knife into the seam and pried the panel up. The lantern light caught the faint gleam of the fortune hidden beneath. Bundles of bearer bonds, stacks of United States Treasury gold certificates, and velvet pouches heavy with double eagle gold coins. Over $2 million. She was not Beatrice Miller. She was Beatrice Langdon, the sole heir to the Langdon shipping and railroad empire in New York. 2 months ago, her father had been found dead in his study, a supposed suicide. But Beatrice knew the truth. Her uncle, Bartholomew Langdon, had orchestrated the murder to seize control of the company and the family's liquid assets. Before Bartholomew could legally freeze the estate, Beatrice had accessed her father's private vault, packed the entirely untraceable fortune into her trunks, and vanished into the anonymity of the mail-order bride system. She pulled a stack of gold certificates from the pile, counting out exactly $4,000. She would tell Nathaniel she had secretly saved it over years of seamstress work. It was a flimsy lie, but it would save his ranch. "I told you never to open it." Beatrice gasped, spinning around. Nathaniel stood at the bottom of the loft stairs, his silhouette broad in the dim light. His eyes were fixed not on her, but on the staggering pile of wealth exposed in the trunk. "Nathaniel," she started, her voice trembling. He stepped forward, his face an unreadable mask. He reached down and picked up one of the gold certificates. It was for $500, stamped with the federal seal. He looked at the bundles of bearer bonds. "A seamstress," Nathaniel said, his voice dangerously quiet. "A destitute seamstress from St. Louis." He dropped the bill back into the trunk and looked at her. "Who are you, Beatrice? And who did you steal this from?" "I didn't steal it," she hissed, tears of panic springing to her eyes. "It's mine. It was my father's." "Nathaniel, please, you have to understand. If they find me, they will kill me." She poured out the truth in a desperate whisper. The shipping empire, the murder, the ruthless uncle, the flight across the country. She explained that she chose him because he lived in the middle of nowhere, a place where a wealthy Eastern heiress would never be found. Nathaniel listened in silence. The betrayal stung. He had opened his home to her, trusted her, and she had brought a target to his back. But as he looked at her shaking hands, the hands that had scrubbed his floors and worked his soil, his anger warred with something much deeper. "You brought a fortune into my house," Nathaniel said slowly, "and you brought the devil right behind it. "I can pay Wade," she pleaded, holding up the $4,000. "I can save the ranch. We can use this to—" "We use that," Nathaniel interrupted, pointing a calloused finger at the money, "and we wave a flag for every Pinkerton and cutthroat east of the Mississippi. Men like Wade notice when a broke dirt farmer suddenly pays off $4,000 in pristine treasury notes." "Then what do we do?" Beatrice whispered. Before Nathaniel could answer, the sharp, distant sound of a horse whinnying in the storm cut through the thunder. Nathaniel instantly blew out the lantern, plunging the cabin into darkness. He moved to the window, peering out into the torrential rain. Lightning flashed, illuminating the ridge a quarter-mile away. Sitting atop a dark horse, watching the cabin, was a lone rider draped in an oilskin duster. Even from a distance, the silhouette was menacing. Beatrice's breath hitched in the dark. "My uncle," she whispered, terrified. "He wouldn't trust the law. He'd hire a tracker." Nathaniel turned away from the window, pulling his Winchester rifle from the rack above the door. "Looks like your past just caught up with us, Mrs. Reed." The thunder cracked again, shaking the very foundations of the cabin. Nathaniel did not wait for the rider to make the first move. He shoved the heavy oak table against the door, his movements silent and urgent. He turned to Beatrice, his eyes catching the faint glow of the lightning slipping through the cracks in the walls. "Get under the floorboards," he ordered, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Take the money, hide in the cellar drop, and do not come out until I call your name." "Nathaniel, no. If that is my uncle's man, he won't leave until he finds me. He'll kill you." "He'll have to shoot straight in the dark," Nathaniel replied, jacking a lever-action shell into the chamber of his Winchester. "Go. Now." Beatrice scrambled to gather the bundles of cash and bonds, dumping them hastily back into the trunk, but left it unlocked. She lifted the small trapdoor hidden beneath the woven rug near the hearth, slipping down into the cramped, earthen root cellar. She pulled the trapdoor shut, just as the front porch boards groaned under heavy boots. A heavy fist pounded on the door. "Open up in there!" A raspy voice shouted over the wind. "Got a lost traveler needing shelter." "Nearest town is Bitter Creek, 10 miles east," Nathaniel yelled back, positioning himself in the shadows near the iron stove. "Keep riding!" The answer was a deafening blast. The wood of the door splintered inward as a shotgun slug tore through the heavy oak, showering the room with deadly splinters. Nathaniel fired back blindly through the hole, the Winchester flashing brilliantly in the pitch-black cabin. A curse echoed from the porch, followed by the sound of boots running along the side of the house. He was flanking. Nathaniel tracked the footsteps, aiming at the side window. Suddenly, the glass behind him shattered. The tracker had thrown a heavy stone through the back window to draw his attention, and in that split second of distraction, the front door was kicked off its hinges. Lightning illuminated the intruder, a massive man draped in a soaking wet duster, gripping a double-barreled shotgun. Nathaniel swung his rifle around, but the man lunged, tackling him to the floor. The Winchester clattered away into the darkness. The two men rolled across the wooden planks, exchanging brutal, heavy blows. The tracker was stronger, his hands finding Nathaniel's throat, pinning him down. "Where is she, farmer?" The man snarled, his breath smelling of stale whiskey and chewing tobacco. "Give me the Langdon girl, and I might leave you with your scalp." Nathaniel gasped for air, his vision swimming. He reached blindly for his belt, searching for his hunting knife, but the tracker had pinned his arms. The grip tightened. Nathaniel's lungs burned. Suddenly, the floorboards beneath the tracker shifted. Beatrice burst from the trapdoor like a fury, wielding the heavy iron fire poker she had grabbed from the hearth. With a scream that rivaled the howling wind, she swung it down with all her might. The iron struck the side of the tracker's head with a sickening crack. The man collapsed, rolling off Nathaniel like a felled tree. Nathaniel coughed violently, rolling onto his hands and knees, pulling air into his starved lungs. He looked up to see Beatrice standing over the unconscious man, the fire poker trembling in her hands, her chest heaving. "I told you," she whispered, her voice shaking with adrenaline and terror. "I am not afraid of hard work." Nathaniel managed a grim, blood-stained smile. He found some rope in the corner and bound the tracker to the center post of the cabin. When he lit the lantern, he rifled through the man's pockets. He found a telegram tucked into the inside pocket of the duster. Target located. Bitter Creek, Wyoming. Bring the girl and the trunk to Denver. Leave no witnesses. B. L. B. 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 Bartholomew, Beatrice breathed, reading over Nathaniel's shoulder. He knows. This man is just a scout. There will be more coming. An army of them. Nathaniel stared at the telegram, then at the massive trunk in the corner. We can't run, Beatrice. A woman and a man carrying a trunk weighing 300 pounds across the frontier? We wouldn't make it to the state line. And I won't run from my home. Then what do? We have Harrison Wade coming to take the land on Tuesday, and my uncle's mercenaries coming to take our lives. A slow, calculating look settled over Nathaniel's rugged features. He looked at the tracker, then at the open trunk, and finally at the stone hearth, where the iron forge sat out back. We give them exactly what they want, Nathaniel said quietly. We give Wade his money, and we give your uncle's men a reason to meet him. Nathaniel, you said paying Wade with treasury notes would draw attention. It would, he agreed, walking over to the trunk and reaching into the velvet pouches. He pulled out handfuls of double-eagle gold coins, which is why we aren't paying him in Federal Reserve notes. Grab the bellows, Beatrice. We're firing up the blacksmith forge. For the next 3 days, the chimney of the Double R Ranch smoked relentlessly. Behind the heavy canvas tarps drawn over the barn windows, Nathaniel and Beatrice worked in grueling heat. They loaded the gold double eagles into Nathaniel's iron-smelting crucible, pumping the bellows until the coals burned white-hot. As the stamped coins melted into liquid fire, destroying their federal markings, Nathaniel poured the molten gold into rough, uneven dirt molds. When the metal cooled, they were left with a heavy canvas sack filled with crude, jagged lumps of raw gold. It looked exactly like a miner's fresh strike. As they worked side by side, their hands covered in soot and ash, the barrier between them melted as thoroughly as the gold. Nathaniel saw a woman of unmatched courage and resilience. Beatrice saw a protector who would walk into hellfire for a woman he barely knew. On the third night, exhausted and covered in grime, Nathaniel took her scarred, calloused hand. When this is over, Nathaniel murmured, brushing a smudge of soot from her cheek. If we survive, you don't have to stay, Beatrice. With this money, you could go to London, Paris. You could have the life you were born for. Beatrice looked up into his eyes, her own fierce and resolute. I already have the life I want, Nathaniel. I am exactly where I belong. He leaned in, and their lips met in a desperate, searing kiss, forged in the ashes of their desperate plan. They were no longer a contract. They were partners. Tuesday morning broke with a heavy, oppressive heat. The storm had passed, leaving the Wyoming plains baking under a relentless sun. At noon, the horizon blurred with the dust of approaching riders. Harrison Wade arrived at the Double R Ranch, accompanied by 4 heavily armed cowboys. Wade dismounted, adjusting his silver-studded gun belt. A smug grin plastered across his face. He held a leather folio containing the deed to Nathaniel's ranch. First of the month, read, Wade called out, striding up to the porch. I told you I'd be back. I hope you and the bride are packed. Nathaniel stood on the porch, leaning casually against the railing, his Winchester resting near his boots. Beatrice stood behind him in the doorway, her hands hidden in the folds of her apron. I'm not going anywhere, Wade, Nathaniel said. He reached down and picked up a heavy burlap sack. He tossed it through the air. It landed at Wade's boots with a profound metallic thud. Wade frowned, looking down at the bag. What's this? Your $4,000, with interest. Wade nudged the bag with his boot, then crouched, untying the thick twine. He reached his hand inside and pulled out a jagged, heavy lump of dull yellow metal. His eyes widened in shock, the smugness evaporating instantly. He bit down on the metal, his eyes snapping to Nathaniel. Gold, Wade whispered, astounded. Raw gold. Where did you get this? That's none of your concern, Nathaniel said coldly. Weigh it if you want. There's closer to 5,000 in there. The debt is paid. Now hand over my mortgage paper. Wade stood up slowly, the gold nugget clutched tightly in his fist. Greed, raw and ugly, twisted his features. A rancher who suddenly pays off an impossible debt with raw gold meant only one thing. There was a strike on the property, a rich one. "You found a vein," Wade said, his voice lowering to a predatory growl. "On this miserable patch of dirt, you found a vein. Hand over the paper, Wade. The transaction is done." Wade laughed, a cold, dry sound. He looked back at his 4 gunmen. They shifted, their hands resting on their holsters. "I don't think so, Nathaniel. See, this gold came from my land. You owed me the debt. The land was forfeit. The deadline is today. The debt is paid. Only if I accept it," Wade sneered. "Boys, kill him. Keep the woman alive until she tells us where he dug this up." Before Wade's men could draw their weapons, a sharp, echoing whistle cut through the hot air. Everyone froze. Over the eastern ridge, a new group of riders appeared. There were 8 of them, riding hard, wearing dusters and bowler hats. At their lead was Gideon Cross, a notorious mercenary from Chicago known for his ruthless efficiency. They had found the bound scout in the barn, and they had found the ranch. Wade's men turned, pulling their revolvers, confused by the sudden arrival of strangers. Cross reined his horse in at the edge of the yard, his cold eyes scanning the scene. He looked past Wade, his gaze locking onto Beatrice on the porch. "Beatrice Langdon," Cross called out, his voice carrying like a crack of a whip. "Your uncle sends his regards. We've come for the trunk, and we've come for you." Wade turned to Nathaniel, thoroughly bewildered. "Langdon? What is he talking about?" "I think you have a problem, Wade," Nathaniel said smoothly. "That man right there is Gideon Cross. He's here to take my wife, and he's here to take the $2 million in bearer bonds she has sitting in my parlor." Wade's jaw practically hit the dirt. $2 million? "That's right," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying to the mercenaries. "And I just sold this land, and everything on it, to Mr. Harrison Wade here. He's the new owner. Including the trunk." Cross narrowed his eyes at Wade. Wade, blinded by a staggering, unimaginable level of greed, looked at the 8 mercenaries. He had 5 men. The odds were bad, but $2 million was enough money to buy half the state of Wyoming. "This is my property," Wade shouted at Cross, drawing his ivory-handled Colt. "You boys are trespassing. Kill the local trash," Cross ordered his men calmly. "Take the girl." The yard exploded in gunfire. Nathaniel grabbed Beatrice, diving through the front doorway, just as a hail of bullets shredded the porch railing. Wade and his cowboys took cover behind the water trough and their horses, firing fiercely at the charging mercenaries. Cross's men returned fire, the booming cracks of rifles and revolvers, turning the peaceful ranch into a war zone. Inside, Nathaniel pulled Beatrice behind the heavy iron stove. "Are you ready?" he shouted over the deafening roar of the shootout. She nodded, her face pale but determined. In her hands, she held 3 sticks of mining dynamite leftovers from Nathaniel's well-digging days. Outside, Wade's men were dropping. 2 of his cowboys lay dead in the dirt, but they had taken 3 of Cross's mercenaries with them. Wade was screaming furiously, firing his Colt until it clicked empty. Cross, unbothered by the chaos, dismounted and strode purposefully toward the cabin, a Winchester at his shoulder. Nathaniel kicked out the remaining glass of the front window. Now, Beatrice struck a match, touching it to the fuses of the dynamite. The fuses hissed violently. She handed them to Nathaniel, who hurled them out the window, straight toward the heavy wagon Wade had ridden in on. The explosion tore the earth apart. A massive pillar of fire and dirt erupted in the center of the yard, throwing horses and men into the air. The concussive wave blew the front door off the cabin entirely. Thick, choking smoke blanketed the property. Coughing through the dust, Nathaniel stepped out onto the ruined porch, his rifle raised. Through the clearing smoke, Harrison Wade lay pinned beneath the splintered wheel of his wagon, groaning in agony, his legs shattered. Around him, the surviving mercenaries were either unconscious or fleeing on foot, terrified by the blast. Only Gideon Cross remained standing. He was bleeding from a shrapnel wound to the shoulder, but his eyes were locked on Nathaniel. Cross raised his rifle, Nathaniel fired first. The Winchester barked once. Cross staggered backward, dropping his weapon, and collapsed into the Wyoming dust. Silence descended on the Double R Ranch, broken only by the crackle of burning wood from the wagon and the pained moans of Harrison Wade. Nathaniel slowly lowered his rifle, the barrel smoking. Beatrice stepped out from the cabin, her dress torn and covered in soot, but she stood tall. She walked down the steps, past the body of Gideon Cross, and stood over Harrison Wade. Wade looked up at her, terrified, coughing up dust. "Help! Help me!" Beatrice looked down at the man who had tried to ruin her husband. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the folded mortgage paper Wade had dropped in the chaos. She tucked it safely into her bodice. "The debt is paid, Mr. Wade," she said coldly. A week later, Nathaniel and Beatrice stood in the polished mahogany office of a federal judge in Denver. They had loaded the heavy, brass-bound trunk onto a secure train, guarded by Pinkertons they had hired themselves. With the help of the judge, a man renowned for his hatred of Eastern corporate corruption, they orchestrated a quiet legal maneuver. The bearer bonds were liquidated into anonymous Western Railroad investments, out of Bartholomew Langdon's reach. Bartholomew, facing sudden, inexplicable resistance from phantom shareholders, eventually lost control of the company and was indicted for embezzlement soon after. He never found out what happened to his niece. As for Harrison Wade, he survived, but was permanently crippled and bankrupted by the loss of his men and his reputation. Nathaniel and Beatrice returned to the Bitter Creek Valley. They didn't build a mansion. They built a sturdy, beautiful new ranch house with a wraparound porch, bought the finest cattle in the territory, and paid their ranch hands double the going wage. One quiet evening in the autumn, Nathaniel sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the jagged Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in strokes of violent orange and soft purple. Beatrice stepped out, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him and sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You ever miss it?" Nathaniel asked quietly, his arm wrapping around her waist. "The cities? The ball gowns?" Beatrice looked out over the vast, untamed expanse of their land, feeling the solid, unbreakable warmth of the man beside her. She smiled, turning the simple silver ring on her finger. "Not for a single second," she whispered. What an explosive finale. From a desperate mail-order bride hiding $2 million to a fiery shootout that changed the frontier forever, Beatrice and Nathaniel proved that true love and a loaded Winchester conquer all. Did you see that dynamite twist coming? Let us know in the comments below. If you loved this Wild West tale of romance, betrayal, and redemption, smash that like button, share the story, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling Western sagas.